Welcome to the Insight Myanmar podcast. Before we get into today's show, I wanted to let you know that we have a lot more written and video content on our website. If you haven't visited it yet, we invite you to take a look at www.insightmyanmar.org. In addition to complete information about all of our past episodes, there's also a variety of blogs, books, and videos to check out, and you can also sign up for our regular newsletter. But for now, enjoy what follows, and remember, sharing is caring.
And welcome back. My guest today is a Hong Kong activist and also a co-founder of the Milk Tea Alliance Friends of Myanmar, which I'm sure is going to lead us into many fascinating recent historical discussions. But before we get into that, Johnson, thank you very much for joining us today, and I'd like to give you the chance to introduce yourself for our audience.
Thank you for hosting the podcast. I'm a regular listener to Inside Myanmar, so I'm so excited to be here in conversation with you.
And we're always excited to have people who already know who we are and already like what we do. But yeah, can you tell us a little bit about your sort of history of activism in Hong Kong and your involvement with the Milk Tea Alliance?
Sure. And once again, just thank you for hosting so many episodes in Inside Myanmar. Like the insight, the nuances, the complexity of Myanmar. Those episodes I enjoy a lot, and I think this is a very good service to the people and also to the community around the world. Including myself, I learned a lot about Myanmar and also how to be a good ally. And this is actually connected to kind of the origins of my activism. I have been a pro-democracy activist in Hong Kong for over 12 years. When I start my universities, there are a lot of campaign and student activisms in the campus where students could join easily. And I remember the first time I went to a protest, it was about the Taiwan massacre. It was a commemoration of the Taiwan massacre that took place in 1989. And I always have interest in politics as well. So I guess that's the reason why I'm so inclined in joining different protests and also social movement as a whole. When I study in university, I study politics because I really want to find out a better way of doing politics. And I remember in my first year in my political philosophy class, my teachers told me that the essence of the political philosophy was about how could we as a human, as a community, could live together or coexist with each other. And I think that has really transcended throughout my activisms, that I always keep the community and people in mind, and most importantly, trying to find a way for people to build consensus, to communicate better and to collaborate better so that we can actualize the life that we collectively want. So that student activisms, one way leading to the others, has led me to a position where I was one of the many organizers of the umbrella movements in 2014, where millions of people took to the street, occupied the street for months, to fight for universal suffrages and a better political reform in town. And the umbrella movement was studied by a lot of activists, young activists around the world, especially those that are based in Southeast Asia. So that's how I first engaged in regional solidarity work, and also get involved in regional networks, and touch base and learn and exchange with young activists around the world. So fast forwarding to more recent 5 years, I have been heavily involved in solidarity work to Myanmar, especially after 2021. Um, there is a pocket in the Multi Alliance called Multi Alliance Friends of Myanmar, where activists from the Philippines, from Taiwan, from Indonesia, and many countries in the regions are showing up together to support Myanmar resistance movement, and also to be a good allies, to be a good friends, to be a good peers with our Myanmar activists, trying to exert political pressure and at the same time support fellow activists in personal to personal capacities. I'm also involved in different organizations such as the Amnesty International Hong Kong, and yeah, that's me. I like rock climbing. Aside from doing activism, I also have other habit, and that would be rock climbing. And I actually find the process of rock climbing quite resonating or quite similar to activism, because during rock climbing, you always fall, and you always get disappointed about why couldn't I just get to the top and get to the peak. But every time we fail, we just keep going, like what we do in activism.
It reminds me of the saying. I don't know whether this is actually a Chinese saying or whether it's just something that circulates in the West as part of the kung fu movie culture, but that truism that with every step the mountain becomes a little bit smaller until with the final step the mountain disappears entirely. And I do agree with you. I think there's a lot that we can do in our lives in terms of physical challenges where we have to learn to make small progress. We have to learn to find success where we can find it. And we have to just keep putting one foot in front of the other so that we can slowly make the mountain smaller. And then, of course, once you're at the top of the mountain, you can look back and you can feel good at how far you've come. But along the way, it's important to have some way to remind yourself that the journey has an end. There is a
Absolutely.
reason for this. Mm,
Absolutely. And also acknowledging that different people have their own pace and method in overcoming or navigating the very difficult terrains. Um, and that would require a lot of inner listening and understanding about oneself in order to find the right pace for um, a person to overcome the challenge they have. And what's fun about rock climbing or activism is after you went onto the peak of a mountain, there's always another mountain that you can
mm.
take the challenge. So again, like activism, there's no ending of activism because injustice is everywhere. And after you finish one milestone, there's always something you can keep on fighting for.
I it just reminds me. I assume then it's the same for you as it is in many of the other sports. I do different sports, and the same problem comes up. You fixate on a goal, you fixate on trying to do something, and you tell yourself, I just want to achieve this. I just want to do this. And with lifting weights, for example, we tell ourselves, I just want to be able to lift this weight, and then I'll be happy, then I'll be satisfied. And you lift it, and before you've even put the weight back down, you're already thinking, but I could go more. What's my next goal? What's my next objective? You're never satisfied. You're never stagnant. You always want to do more. You always want to reach that higher peak. Um, as
Yeah,
you put it.
and that might sound like, okay, we are treating activisms or struggle as a game, as a challenge, which to some aspect it does pose a challenge to people that makes people want to overcome it. But at the same time, it is also a process of self-actualization. I think, especially in the past few years, Hong Kong is really in a bad shape. That the political repression is very high, it's very intense. A lot of civic space has been shut down. So being an activist does not earn you a lot of social capital or honor. Rather it was like more threat or danger. So but at the same time, like in the past few years, I feel like, okay, the reason why I'm staying in Hong Kong, despite a lot of my friends or peers has already relocated or someone went in exile, I also feel that aside from the tangible, objective goal of trying to make the lives of my people better, there is also an aspect or a motivation in my activism that I feel the process of engaging activism is empowering, it is self-actualization, and most importantly, I'm getting reward, but not tangible reward like money or honor, but I am feeling that I'm fulfilling my mission. So that happiness or that fulfilling emotion that I got from activism is one of the many factors that I keep on doing what I do now.
And again, I don't want to get too much into just these wise expressions that get thrown around, but it reminds me of that the image of the old man who plants a tree whose shade he is never going to live in or enjoy. And I think that was always an image that stuck with me, because it is about not doing things just for yourself and not doing things because you'll receive accolades for them, but doing things because you know that what you do today is going to make someone's life better tomorrow or the day after or the next year or the next decade or the next century. And I think a lot of social movements were successfully led by people like that. And when we look at different types of social movements, social emancipation movements, at the time that these people are fighting against the systems of oppression, they are often viewed very negatively. They are caricatured very negatively. They are laughed at. They are punished. They are mistreated by the system. And many of them die in obscurity and they're not really remembered, even though their work and their sacrifices were what made it possible for subsequent generations to continue that fight on much more favorable terms, in a light that is viewed much more positively by society as a righteous cause, as opposed to, as it was originally viewed as this fringe extremist idea, whether it's, the emancipation of different races, whether it's the emancipation of women, whether it's the emancipation of individuals from the oversights of a tyrannical government. There is a lot to be said for people who are not looking for personal fame and personal glory and do not necessarily expect to see the fruits of the tree that they are planting, but they do it anyway because the next generations need someone to have laid that foundation for them to continue to build upon.
Yeah, having that someone or next generations in mind when we were doing activism is utterly important. And I found some people in the Multi Alliance as well.
Absolutely. So let's start talking about the Milk Tea Alliance then, and we'll circle back to a lot of the Hong Kong politics because there's some fascinating stuff there. But the Milk Tea Alliance then, what is the essence of the Milk Tea Alliance? Why is it called the Milk Tea Alliance?
The origins of the Multi Alliance, there were multiple versions of it, but the most prominent one was a online internet meme war in 2020. Back then, a lot of Thai people, Taiwanese and Hong Kong people were using Twitter as a way to engage everyday life, but also engage in activism. And there was this particular incident that some Thai pop star, were being cancelled by Chinese netizens for a comment over Taiwan and China. The pop star was accused of supporting Taiwan independencies, and that is a huge taboo and also red line in China, and also Chinese netizens love to use that to cancel people that they don't see eye to eye. So that has evolved into a meme battle between the Thai netizens and the Chinese trolls. And gradually, Thai netizens has galvanized it and invited Taiwanese and Hong Kong netizens to join the meme battle as well. And at a certain point in the midst of this online turmoil, someone has coined the term multi-alliance to signify a informal, a spontaneous alliance or collective identity in Southeast Asia and in East Asia. Because beauty is as a drink or as a cultural symbol is pretty widespread across the region, right? Each countries or territories have their own version, prominent versions of milk tea. So you have, the bubble tea in Taiwan, which is utterly popular around the world, and you have the Hong Kong milk tea, which is very common in every single chanting, which is like tea restaurants we have. And then you go to Myanmar, you also have a different kind of tea restaurants and their own versions of milk tea. So that has signified the alliance of the peoples in the region. So the milk tea then has become a symbol that everyone knows. Everyone can resonate because almost everyone drink milk tea at least once. Um, and but then, what is the meaning? What is the essence of the alliance? So again, because the alliance is not a homogeneous or a hierarchical organization, right? There's no one single international secretary or leader can define its content. Rather, it is constructed by the meaning and the content and the principles, the values of multi-alliance are constructed by people that are getting involved in the multi-alliance or top multi-alliance as their identity. And to be honest, I actually didn't participate in the initial meme war between the Thai, the Hong Kong, the Taiwanese, and the Chinese troop. I came after. I took the label as part of my identity much later after the meme war. And the reason I took it in is because there are multiple activists, young activists who I know in person, were using this hashtag to share news about their own versions of democracy movement, human rights movement, LGBT movement. And I find it a very easier way to use the hashtag and to also share what's happening in Hong Kong as well. So going back to the principles and the values of the multi alliance, there's no single person who can define it, but after years of constructions from the people who utilize the label, we can observe multi-alliance is a loose alliance that are joined and participated by activists who support democracy, who support the values of equities, and also, most importantly, anti-authoritarianism around the region. Because aside from beauty being a very common drinks in the region, authoritarianism is also a very common phenomenon in our region. So people use this hashtag and also identity to express a collective virtues and also aspirations for freedom, for anti-authoritarianism, anti-discriminations, and most importantly, solidarity to each others. And this is, I think, the they're also one of the top values in the multi-alliance. That is, there's not a single organizations that are coordinating actions, or say, okay, different national chapters need to do what. Rather, it is based on volunteerism. It was based on person-to-person solidarity. It is based on a kind of solidarity that doesn't attach money, doesn't attach conditions. Rather, it is really grew from friendships and um, the urge of supporting each other because we see ourselves in the same cause.
I'm just wondering, like, before we get into the details of the milk tea alliance, what is the milk tea like actually in Hong Kong? Because the Burmese version of milk tea is typically like a black tea that's been steeped for quite a long time with both condensed milk and evaporated milk. But what's the Hong Kong version of this?
It's pretty similar. So tea leaves wipes, the more conventional tea leaves that are used in milk tea in Hong Kong is the Ceylon tea, Sri Lanka tea.
Hmm.
There's actually multiple types of Ceylon tea that are coming from different regions of Sri Lanka. So you have maybe red and black tea mixing each other. So that form as the base of the tea. And then according to the preference of this customer, either you use condensed milk or just milk, and then add them into the milk tea. Now, of course, we are in a very globalized world where popular culture like bubble tea or different kinds of ingredients might be added to milk tea as well, so that to make it more diverse. But the most conventional one was multiple Ceylon tea plus milk.
Hmm. It's interesting. Because of course the bubble tea is quite notably different, and the Thai version of milk tea is also um, quite different. So that's interesting that there's that similarity there. And you also talk about the decentralization of the Milk Tea Alliance, which I think is a really important factor, and there's a great versatility in not having a strict hierarchy, not having sort of a head that can be removed by state authorities. But I'm wondering though, does this decentralized nature, and you spoke very heavily about the meme war, does this make the Milk Tea Alliance much more of an internet phenomenon, or does it actually have sort of physical real world manifestations?
It's a hybrid model. It was started on the internet where people would relies on digital campaigning, right? So sharing memes, go to different Twitter accounts such as the ASEAN Twitter account and trying to troll them or pressure them or shame them as a tactics in exerting political influence and pressure. But then there are gradually some uptick in the physical world as well, where activists were in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Hong Kong as well, would raise the banners of the milk tea and trying to target embassies as a way to express our political demand as well. I remember when protest was still a thing in Hong Kong in 2021, because right now it's highly regulated and it's become very risky to also protest in a physical site in Hong Kong. Back in 2021, I remember there were several Burmese students who study in Hong Kong. They were calling for a solidarity protest on a landmark locations in Hong Kong, which is the Peak. So I went there, held a banner, and there were like a few dozens of people, and they were holding different types of milk tea to signify the milk tea alliance. So that was actually quite empowering because most of the overseas students are in Hong Kong are seen as apolitical, right? But I think that collaborations between overseas students and the local in amplifying events that is not related to Hong Kong, that is pretty new and that is pretty fresh to the civil society in Hong Kong.
Mm. And I want to look at this the meme war. So you were saying basically that this was a Thai person who was being accused of being pro Taiwanese independence, which in and of itself pretty fascinating fascinating topic. But I think we can assume for the moment that our audience is aware that Taiwanese independence probably a hot button topic in mainland China. But you say then that this meme war happened. Now, I wonder what you can say about this, because we've heard a lot, or I've heard a lot, anyone who focuses on PRC, especially content that is critical of the PRC, critical of the CCP, we'll hear certain phrases like Little Pink, like Wu Mao, effectively people who are either pathologically loyal to the CCP and go online and independently meme for them or comment aggressively for them, or move the ratings of products and videos in a certain direction, or people who are ostensibly paid and hence the name Wu Mao, meaning I think like half of a UN or something, to make comments on behalf of the interests of the CCP, posing as regular netizens. So it seems that the Chinese state both is alleged to have quite a lot of people who will go onto the internet and fight internet comment battles and meme battles on behalf of the CCP, but also a lot of people who will take up that mantle and do it voluntarily as a sort of patriotic duty. And I wonder what you can say about this. Do you find any truth to these allegations, or do you think there is government behind this meme war? Was it only private citizens behind the meme war? What would you say?
Well, there are proper documentation to show Chinese trolls were coordinating under the Chinese regimes in going after different topics. As a matter of fact, there was actually a leak around several months ago, which shows how the Chinese government were hiring hackers and hiring trolls as well in going after different target. So that was properly documented. But you were right that sometimes trolls were not hired by the regimes. They might not even affiliated by the regimes. It could be private citizens who just feel very patriotic and feel very urged in supporting the narrative of the regimes. So there are, of course, cases like that. And then there's also malicious actor that are actually not very patriot, but patriotism could also be a businesses, right? Like you said, like if someone is an online personnel, post inflammatory comment about the enemies of the PRC regimes, they may get more approval from the both governments and also from the society as a whole. They might get more frames and reputation so that they can sell their products much better. So that is not a unique phenomenon in China, but it is it is very common, and also it is highly visible because after all, Chinese regime is a huge country. You have so many actors in there, and also one particular characteristics about the Chinese regimes in the informations warfare is you don't, in a Western or the global tech firm, global social media, they don't get to enter the Chinese market, right? Because they are all banned or they will withdraw from the Chinese market. And having Chinese trolls and the private citizens that are echoing the narratives of the officials in China would be very effective in international social media scenes, right? Because they, like the critical comments were not be able to enter the Chinese internet, but critical comment against so-called enemies of the Chinese regimes could flow very effectively and freely across the world. So that is another characteristics about the Chinese information warfare. So some might feel that meme campaign or meme war is just a plaything among youth, but actually it is part of information warfare or soft power, right? That are exerting by different national actors. So going after celebrities who are accused of supporting Taiwan independence or going after celebrities that are critical to China has real world impact and also a soft power implication. Because if some celebrities get cancelled for being critical to China, then it might send as a warning sign to other celebrities who wants to be critical to China as well. So gradually, in our information space, there will be less critiques and less diverse opinions, less nuances analysis about what is China doing and what is China doing around the world.
Mm. And I mean, certainly the infrastructure that the PRC has is terrifying. I've spent quite a bit of time researching how the infrastructure of WeChat and Weixin has been organized, and to an extent the distinction between TikTok and Douyin, and things like Xina Weibo. It is shocking how I'm not even going to say how easy it is. It's beyond easy. How automated the censorship of comments that people are making to each other privately has become in China, and it seems that memes and memes seem to have such a power, not because they're memes and they're exactly what a meme is supposed to be. They're small units of culture adopted in a way to convey a very complex, very nuanced opinion about something in a very short graphical format. Like that's what a meme can do. It's a very powerful tool. And I was spent quite a lot of time on Burmese memes, translating them and explaining them. But it seems that memes are also a mechanism that people use to bypass Chinese state censorship a lot. I heard people saying, "Well, we send voice messages on Weixin because voice messages cannot be censored in real time." You can back in the day you could handwrite a message, take a photograph of it, and send it to someone, and the handwriting recognition software was not yet advanced enough to be able to identify that image and remove it. Or the Chinese seem to have a very rich vocabulary of synonyms and wordplay to be able to use seemingly innocuous characters and words to talk about topics that would otherwise be forbidden. For example, I believe the Tiananmen Square massacre, which happened on the 4th of June, is frequently referred to as happening on the 35th of May, which, if there were a 35th of May, it would be the 4th day of June. And I think rice bunnies was used for the Me Too movement because rice is me and bunny is too. So all these sorts of things. It seems that memes are such an essential tool in the Chinese net space just to be able to express displeasure with the state, just to be able to convey information that the state could so readily and willingly cut from existence without anyone ever knowing that it happened.
Yeah, I think censorship.
It's just quite shocking.
Yeah, it is.
Mm.
It's also fascinating, right? Like the way that people use memes to communicate each other and transmit political messages. Though, one nuance is memes, censorships against memes, that technology is also developing and getting more mature. So government is always going after different form of expressions of dissent. And I think you were very right that aside from people were using it to communicate with each others and also to evade censorships. Meme also inherently has a power of creating a collective, right? Because when you look at a meme that you're familiar with, you understand its meaning. So meme is usually obscure, right? It's an obscure art. It is a obscure pictures that might not have a direct message, but people who receive memes, um, those who have insider knowledge, would laugh when they were seeing a meme. They would smile. They would crack a joke with their friends. That's because they were insider, right? Because they understand the inside joke and inside meanings of a meme. So the fact that someone understands a meme means they are sort of part of a community or part of an in-group who understand
Mm.
group culture. So that's the power of meme, right? Not only it is transmitting a political messages, it is also enforcing a collective identity where people will crack a joke and smile because they understand it.
And so, this is the question with censorship, because I was born behind the Iron Curtain, and back in the socialist regimes in Europe, what you generally had was a system where, yes, there was government censorship, but the censors themselves, the people doing the censorship, were generally not the smartest people in the world. They were obviously, they were pathologically loyal to the state, which is how they got their jobs, but they weren't that smart. And so, if you were able to hide your true meaning through allegory or through, layered references, reading between the lines, things like this, you could typically get something through. Now, I mean, censorship in my country was not as extreme as it was in many others, but a lot of anti-government, anti-socialist system content was able to be produced just because it was, ostensibly, on the surface of it, it was criticizing something else. It was criticizing the West. It was criticizing capitalism. It was criticizing Nazism. It was criticizing whatever. When in reality, it was a critique of socialism, but the censors were not smart enough to do that. Do you feel that in the Chinese sphere, memes are able to bypass the censors, or do the censors have a knowledge of this? Is there this bifurcation of society where the censors are generally seen as less intelligent, um, not having a sense of humor, and therefore would not be familiar with these references, the movies, the TV shows, the advertising, the whatever you're turning into a meme? Or are they likely to come from the same group, have gone to the same schools, grew up on the same TV shows, and therefore be able to understand these memes?
I think I think you're right that those who engage in censorship are usually people that are with similar characteristics, right? They're not very smart, they're very loyal, and first they might not understand intent and able to read between lines. And we are seeing that frequency in the online censorship space. That sometimes a new vocabularies ran through that is criticizing the government. And this is always a mouse and cat game where the regime always catch up, right? Like there are
Mm,
moments where the censor machines might lose their guard or unable to understand, what they need to censor. But gradually, they always catch up, right? Because they have a lot of resources, and because when a meme or when a vocabulary gain popular, it will ultimately land into the ears of the authority and the censor as well. So the latest,
mm,
not the latest, but the more prominent example was the A4 revolutions in China, which took place during the COVID time in 2023, where young people were holding a white paper sign to express their angers and grievances of the strict restrictions of the government during COVID time, right? So that weren't
mm.
censored immediately, but the authority catch up gradually. And another things about the censorship regimes in China is not only we need to pay attention to the abilities of the government in understanding and capturing what they should censor, but we also pay attention to the capacity of censorships of the whole information space of China. What is interesting about or you can say what is powerful about the Chinese censorship system is there's not a alternative internet space in China. It is highly regulated, constructed, and the logics of internet is highly regulated by the Chinese authority. There's this Great Firewall where most of the foreign news sites are banned and prohibited in the Chinese internet space. Most of the, not most, but all of the internet service providers inside China are obeying the cybersecurity rules or internet censorship rules that are written by the authorities. Even Apple, as a global conglomerate, have to comply with Chinese cybersecurity rules and upload their user data into a server that are owned and within the Chinese jurisdiction. All right, so you're right that the censorship regimes in China is evolving, and at the same time, those who are engaged in censorships, they might be coming from a similar background or might have a similar personalities, right? Because people that are loyal to the government are not necessarily the smartest people, right? They might not be able to pick up and able to identify what needs to be censored in real time. And um, and in every single censorship regimes, including China, censorship is always a mouse and cat game where the government is always playing catch up. All right? Netizens are so creative, including those that are in China. They are so creative that they always find a different terms to express the same meanings. They might use a different vocabulary. They might change the tone a little bit in order to escape from the censorship regimes. They might use meme or picture as well. So one of the more prominent example recently was the A4 revolutions in China, where young activists in Shanghai and also different regions in China were protesting in a very rare protest, expressing their grievances and anger to the government about how the government handled the COVID pandemic measures. That where young people were holding blank paper as a sign of protest in campus and on the street as well, in protesting the draconian control of the government that has led to tragedies, including a fire, including suspectively leading to the death of dozens of people in a fire. Um, so the censors then couldn't catch up, and A4 memes or black paper memes, they were circulated online for a while before they were censored. And one particular characteristics in understanding the Chinese censorship regime is, aside from understanding how the censors catch up and understand what they need to censor, we also need to understand the capacities of the regimes and also the internet environments of China. All right, global firms or Western internet giants, they are either banned or withdraw from the Chinese internet. So there's no alternatives or not a very diverse marketplace of internet in China. All of the internet service providers in China are obligated to comply with the censorship regulations that are written by the government. Even Apple, as a global conglomerate, they have to comply with cybersecurity rules of China and upload all their user data in iCloud to a server that is based in China. Um, so that has made the narratives of the government very prominent in the online space, where netizens are often unable to see alternatives of the truth. And to give you an example, there was, I think it was 2 years ago, if I recall correctly. It was on the day of June 4th. Again, the day where the Thermal massacres took place. There was this online personality who has huge following, like millions of following, who is a very professional earned online personality in selling product. Uh, on June 4th, that person held a cake made with let me rephrase. Like that person, he held a cake with the shape of a tank, like a combat tank, an armor tank, right? And I'm pretty sure he didn't know about June 4. Pretty sure he didn't know about the meanings of tank in the Thermal massacre. And like, and yet, like, he was holding the cake on a live streaming shows where hundreds of thousands of people were watching it, and then that live streaming was cut like 15 seconds later. And that online personality was he basically disappeared for a while. I mean, he wasn't like enforce the disappearance, because I think the authority also knows that like that person really don't know about the history of June 4th. And that example explained like how the information space in China is so restricted that even a huge taboo, right? That's a huge red line, are not known by the ordinary citizens in China, and they might somehow, what a coincidence that they might show a sign of deference without them knowing them, knowing them. Yeah.
I mean, there was a period, there was a meme going in the West actually, when people got angry at Chinese people in general, like whether they were scammers or whether they were just CCP shills or whatever. People would start sending a whole bunch of Tiananmen Square messages, in the hopes that the Chinese recipient's account would be flagged by the Chinese authorities and they would be sort of unable to comment. Whether or not that actually works, I don't know, but that was definitely something that was in vogue about 10 years back, or maybe 15 years back on Western internet. And I've seen all sorts of interesting ones, not just the picture of the tank, but even the character, the Chinese character Dian, for like a drop of liquid, in simplified Chinese, looks a little bit like a tank with the turret pointing to the side. And I've seen people, posting like four tanks or four of the character Dian, and then just a character of a person to symbolize that iconic moment in the Tiananmen Square massacre. And like, if you send that, as you say, like I've shown that to Chinese people here in the West, and they just look at you like they have no idea what you're referencing. They have no idea what this symbolizes. And you show it even to a Westerner, and they look at that and they're like, "Oh, I know exactly what this is." So it's fascinating how isolated you're saying the average people are from the thing that the government is getting angry about in the first instance. It's deeply ironic.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's what makes me feel terrifying sometimes, right? Because the power of the government can really wipe out a collective memories. But at the same time, we do, there's this famous phrase about, you can lie to you can lie, but you cannot lie to all people, or you cannot fool the people all the time, right? Once, and I have a lot of experience of that. Like I've been hearing a lot of stories about, the Chinese youth. Once they are in doubt about the government, then they are very enthusiastic in seeking for the truth and seeking what kind of collective memory were being wiped out by the government. So I think there's like some inherent characteristics among humans that they don't want to be fooled, and they want to see the truth. They want to see what were obscured. So that's where the hopes lies in. And I think the COVID time, like the draconian COVID measure, has really shaped the faith a lot of, especially the Chinese youth, to the government, that they might not see the government as the ultimate authority since then, and able to question what the governments are telling them.
Mm. And then, of course, this would contrast, from my understanding, with the experiences of people in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong has historically enjoyed a much lower degree of censorship, a much lower degree of authoritarian repression. Hong Kong's had a semi, I wouldn't say independence, but has had a significant degree of autonomy. And it wasn't until relatively recently, in the back end of the 2010s, I think it was 2016, when the National Cybersecurity Law was being passed, along with another piece of legislation whose name I can't remember.
It's
which
more
basically,
recent. It's
is
in
it?
2021. The national security law was imposed on Hong Kong in 2021.
Not the
So
National
it's a
Security Law, the National Cybersecurity Law.
no. So that was there was a privacy ordinance, but it wasn't a cybersecurity law. So lucky us, we still don't have a cybersecurity law yet, but it's probably going to happen.
Because the thing is, when I was doing the research, what I found was there was a piece of legislation, two pieces of legislation actually, that were passed and taken together. What they allowed was to basically say that information that is stored on Hong Kong servers can be moved to mainland China and then effectively treated as mainland Chinese information for the purposes of government investigation and oversight. So it didn't, if I remember correctly, it didn't entirely abolish the distinction between the mainland Chinese jurisdiction and Hong Kong jurisdiction, but it made it such that storing information on a Hong Kong server, in a technological sense, no longer functionally separated it from the server systems in mainland China, thereby giving the Chinese government a way to subpoena or gain access to Hong Kong content. It was a while ago that I was looking into that. I may have misremembered, but from memory, that's something that the PRC basically pushed
I think
through.
that has something to do with maybe the Chinese cybersecurity law that might have implications on Hong Kong as well, about cross jurisdiction data transfer. But these things about
I think that would
data,
be the one.
they are always obscure. It's very complicated that, ordinary citizens, it's very hard for them to also understand where their data go.
I mean, not just ordinary citizens. I researched this for months, and I still don't have all of the answers as to how data are being handled by Chinese systems. Like, I found out that if you're messaging someone on WeChat, but you're using the translation function on WeChat, the translation function is actually processed by a third-party company, and their servers are exclusively located within China. So any information that you use the translation function for, even if your communication is taking place outside of China on WeChat, the translated information has now become subject to PRC jurisdiction, because the third-party service provider who does the translation service, you were unaware, is not part of the normal WeChat agreement. That's actually a separate privacy agreement. Like, this is how many layers deep it went. So I still don't fully understand when data are or are not subject to PRC oversight, regulation, data collection, and so on, and censorship. It's that difficult and that obscure. I don't think an average person could ever be expected to understand how these things work, and that's by design.
Yeah,
I would imagine.
it's by design. Data security is part of the larger concept of national securities in China, right? They have this national security context which include a lot of components, and data is one of them. Yeah, data security is part of the national security conceptualizations of the Chinese regime. And in the past few years, right, like there was a huge crackdown in China on the internet sector, right? So you might hear the Didi, which is like the equivalent of Ubers in China. They were trying to get enlisted in the U.S. stock exchanges, which was held by the Chinese cyber authority, cyber administration, SACs, I think something like that. And then you have the end group, right? Like they are trying to get an IPO and then also hold by the government as well. So data that are transferring outside China is seen as a very sensitive subject, which the government oversight is huge in China. And I guess bottom line is, if you were using WeChat, no matter where you are, outside or inside China, you just have to assume that the WeChat internet service provider have your data transferred back to China, and Chinese government has an oversight of it, because there's no encryption, right? There's no end-to-end encryption in WeChat, and then there's also a very little privacy protections to customers who are using a Chinese internet portal. So my advice is trying to avoid them as possible as you can, or just get a different devices to install this Chinese app that you need to use to do whatever you want to do.
Wise advice there. But the reason I'm talking about the difference between Hong Kong and mainland China is because you said that you started your activism with Tiananmen Square. I assume you mean Tiananmen Square, like commemorations, and that's what's fascinating. So it seems that in Hong Kong, not only are people aware of this, but they can actually, or could, I don't know if it's still possible, but they could actually go out and hold events in the memory of the massacre, while people across the strait are not. I shouldn't say across the strait, but like in the mainland, are not even aware that this occurred in many cases. Is that distinction still there, or is that being eroded?
That distinction has become very eroded. I won't say like commemorations of June 4th is illegal in Hong Kong, but the government definitely sent a lot of mixed messages to discourage people from commemorating, or even warn people that like talking about June 4 inflammatories or with messaging that might incite hatred, then the government might arrest you and put you in jail. I actually have a friend who is whose name is Chow Han Tong, who was the government definitely sent a lot of mixed up messages to discourage people from commemorating June 4th, or even trying to deter people from commemorating June 4th. I have a friend whose name is Chan Tong. She is a barrister, human rights lawyer, and also a key organizer of the defunded Hong Kong Alliance, which is the organizers of the June 4 vigils every year in the past 30 years. And she was arrested in 2022 and still remain in jail for seditions and subversion, right? For subversion against the government. Why? Because she and the Hong Kong Alliance, her organizations, was accused of using June 4 to subvert the government. So since then, June 4th vigils has been cancelled and banned by the government, right? Or you can say no one dares to organize a vigils, right? Because for people who wants to host a protest, right, they may get harassed, or they might even put under the risk of getting arrested. So physical and large visuals that has been part of the landscapes of Hong Kong has ceased several years ago. But for 30 years, it has been a gateway for many people, including myself, for young people to understand what social movements are, and to understand, truth seeking, and the atrocity that the government has conducted. I remember the first time I engaged in materials in June 4 was actually in my home, in my grandparents' homes, who is not very political. They were just ordinary people that escaped from China, uh, or you can say immigrate from China. They didn't escape in a rush, so they immigrate from China, and they just kept all these magazines that report about the June 4th and put it somewhere in a shelf in their home. So I remember back then I was like maybe 8 years old or 9 years old. I just go through the cabinet and saw these magazines and start reading them. So that's my first experience of engaging in politics, formal politics and social movement. And I think that has left me an impression about the Chinese government, and justice, and also the injustice, right? That for so many years after, we're almost 35 years later. This year is actually the 35th anniversaries of the June 4th. Those who deceased, who were killed, they didn't have justice yet, and many who trying to seek truth are still remain in jail, locked up in solitary confinement, or even killed during the process.
Well, so that's pretty. It's pretty incredible that things can be that extreme even now, so far after the fact. It's still such a such a dangerous thing to be doing, just to try and find out the truth. And going back to the irony of what you said before, like some people who have accidentally managed to offend the sensibilities of the state because they didn't even know what they were supposed to be avoiding, because they weren't aware of it in the first instance. It's genuinely shocking. But I want to understand then, now that we've discussed this context, before the Milk Tea Alliance was formed, I think the 2019 Umbrella Revolution was kind of this moment that everyone was just sort of watching. Everyone was unsure of what to expect, and from us on the outside, we looked at this as sort of the hope that someone's able to tell, the Central Chinese Authority, like, hey, some people don't want to live the way that you think they should live, and everyone's very hopeful that Hong Kong could stand up and could resist that. Can you explain to us what was happening in the 2019? Why did it happen, and what was the outcome?
Yeah, so the umbrella movement took place in 2014, and in 2019, another uprising took place, even larger one than the umbrella movement, which is the anti-ELAP movement. So the cause of the 2019 protest was because the Hong Kong government was trying to amend a law that would allow the authority sending suspects of the Chinese regime to mainland China. So that caused a lot of panic across the society about prisoners' rights, and also the Hong Kong people, especially those that are seen as the enemies of the regime, will be sent to mainland China, which has an even worse human rights record and treatment against prisoners, less rule of law and fair trials. So that caused a lot of paranoia and a lot of anxieties in the society. And that gradually becomes huge mobilizations and protests, urban uprising, confrontation, violent confrontations between the police and the protesters as well. So that were 4 months long, almost 5 months long of political turmoil, where there will be exchanges of Molotov cocktail and rubber bullet and tear gas between the protesters and also the police. And it was also you can say, the largest social movement in throughout Hong Kong history, where there was this estimate that more than 1/3 of the populations in Hong Kong has participated in various contentions of this 5 months long of turmoil, where police brutality was very common and widespread. So amidst this turmoil, there were a lot of reporting from international medias, and Hong Kong protesters were seen in combating tear gas and rubber bullet quite effectively. That they have different equipments and they have different tactics in extinguishing tear gas. So that makes international headline, and that has also inspired and become a playbook for other movement as well in dealing with police brutality. So during those 5 months of turmoil, the power of the protesters has become less intense, because the police brutality was also escalating. There were, fatigue, and also there was these concentrations of protests on the street has gradually fade away because of the police brutality, and also because of COVID as well. And after that, the government has responded with retaliations, and that's when the national security law was imposed in Hong Kong.
Wow. So I know it's a very sensitive question, but then would you say, in the scheme of things, that the revolution failed, or did it still manage to curtail what the Hong Kong Authority was trying to achieve, in a sense?
It's I think the jury is just out there, right? Like, looking back in this time space of 2024, the civil society and civic space is highly regulated. The 2021 National Security Law, and also the more recent one, Article 23 National Security Law, that is imposed on us this year. So I think the jury is out there. If we see things if we see things now, right, in the time space of 2024, civil society and civic space is highly regulated and restricted. The 2021 National Security Law, and also the more recent National Security Law in 2024, has a lot of implications on civil society, right? Like, for instance, if a civil society groups is seen as connecting with international civil society groups, right? They can be seen as a foreign agent. If they engage in advocacy activities outside Hong Kong, like lobbying foreign governments on imposing sanctions or criticizing the Hong Kong authority, right? The civil society groups or the person could be jailed for over 10 years for colluding foreign forces. There are heightened versions of seditious law, which is something that I think the authority also use a lot in Myanmar as well, on curtailing, on regulating people's speech and expression. Um, a simple speech that is seen as inciting hatred against the government could land you 7 years in jail. So I think that has that is the reactions of the government to the 2019 protests. So from this perspective, one could say, okay, the 2019 protest is a failure, that the government has win. But at the same time, we also need to acknowledge what is the cause of the government in putting out such a draconian measures against the society. We have, in the past few years, more than close to 300,000 people immigrate out from the cities. Right, they immigrate to the UK, they immigrate to Australia, to Taiwan, and many of them are actually middle class and professionals. There is a huge brain drains in town, where you can't find good people into more professional jobs. You have foreign investments that are withdrawing from Hong Kong. Media conglomerate as well. Wall Street Journal has just announced last week that they are relocating from Hong Kong. They are relocating their regional headquarters from Hong Kong to Singapore. So those are the calls of the government in changing the social contract and put out a draconian measures against society. And this turmoil is still happening, but the government really have a hard time in locating foreign investment. There are huge deficits in government budgets, and a lot of young people don't feel hopeful about the futures of Hong Kong. Now, all these grievances and change in our society, would that contribute to a political reform or a change in our politics? The jury is just out there, right? But there are a lot of moving parts, I would say, in the society where there are still opportunities in galvanizing the public and also to promote democratic values. And I think one legacy is that the 2019 protests really have is one first, to show what authoritarianism, the true face of authoritarianism, right? So that people who are committed to the values of democracy are even more committed. It has also reinforced the identities of the Hong Kong people, where it was the first time where there are close to 1/3 of the populations are working together, mobilizing together for the same cause. So that has implications to the collective identities, and we all know the collective identity and collective memories are a huge driving force to democracy movement, to all kinds of movement as well. I don't feel very optimistic about the futures of Hong Kong, at least in the short term. But I also acknowledge that if we want to be a better political community, this turmoil, this suffering, and these tensions that we are all enduring could be transformed, right, in the future, in helping us to understand what is peace, what is nonviolence, what is consensus building, and most importantly, how we are going to live together without always trying to eliminate our counterpart.
And I think this is then that hopefully this is what you're talking about, these new ways to be able to advocate for democracy constantly. Sort of these opportunities pop up, and now we have movements in Myanmar, obviously, in Thailand. I know you previously mentioned Article 112 in Thailand, which greatly strengthened lèse-majesté laws, which are very unpopular publicly. And so that there's, through this Milk Tea Alliance, then there is greater ability to support one another. And I know you said at the beginning of our interview that one of your the foci is ways to support other activists. And so I'm wondering now, what are the ways, or are there any ways in which, through the Milk Tea Alliance, people in one country can actually give some sort of significant support to people in another country who are fighting for a different conflict, but ultimately are fighting for the same freedoms and the same democracy that everyone in the Milk Tea Alliance wants to achieve? Is there a way beyond just solidarity that different groups can actually tangibly help?
Yeah, I think that is a challenge that we are meeting, and every day we need to ask ourselves how we can do better in supporting each other. I can think about few ways. There are the person-to-person support that maintain the morale and also the well-being of activists who are exerting political influence or doing organizing. And that is something that sometimes overlooked because people are focusing on the strategies of the movement or the tactics of the movement. But I actually find this is the niche of having a multi-alliance or having a regional solidarity movement. That is, when you have activists that are coming from similar walks of life, where they are traumatized or suffering from authoritarianisms, they understand each other's difficulties. They might have a similar language in sharing their suffering and also trauma as well. And those peer support could be transformed into motivations and also reasons for people to continue their struggle. So I think that's the first way. The second way is how may we exchange knowledges and failure or lessons about our mobilizing and also our way of doing activism. So you just mentioned 112 or the seditions law, right? The architectures of oppression across the region is actually quite similar to each other's. And then there are ways that people are trying to evade censorships or evade this oppression architecture innovatively, creatively. So these lessons could be used by the activists in the region as well, and localizing it in their own context. And spark new ideas or innovations in their own activism and continue the movement. And then the third way is about how do we imagine the futures of our regions. So I think and that's another part that I feel multi-alliance has contributed in some way. That is to challenge the supremacies or the challenge the hierarchy of ASEANs or also the international systems that we are living in. That in the past, when we talked about international developments or international scrutinies on human rights, we will often think about, okay, let's go to the UN and let's go to the ASEAN, let's engage in this formal procedures and system. So I think that another ways for us to work together is also trying to reimagine what kind of international systems or regional systems that we can co-create in supporting the people, in centering the will of the people. I think one main challenges that multi-alliance has, or one agenda that the multi-alliance has posted is, do we always have to rely on the conventional international systems, such as the ASEAN or the UN, in resolving the conflict that people have and do? And this is still an experiment. I'm not saying we already find the solutions and we can get rid of the international systems that we are living in. But in the past, when we were saying, okay, we need some international regimes in scrutinizing human rights situations, we always thought about, okay, let's go to the Human Rights Committee at the United Nations, or let's go to the ASEANs, and hopefully they will send some statement on criticizing the governments, the national governments. And we've seen in the past few years, like the 5-point consensus or the interventions of the United Nations is largely captured by the elite. It's formal in a sense, but not very useful for its people. So the multi-alliance has gathered a groups of activists who sometimes might have influence over their national politics, and they can serve as an actor in transmitting the will of the people, such as those that are in Myanmar, into their national politics as well. They can serve as messengers in bringing upon the real messaging, the truth from the ground, and also the agenda setting of the Myanmar people. So we've seen example like in Thailand on how the Thai multi-alliance activists has trying to shape the narratives about how Thai foreign policy should be shaped against Myanmar. So those are the experiments that the multi-alliance has been engaging. Um, and I think that gradually might help us in co-creating a people-centered foreign policy or people-centered foreign relationship that is not dominated by the elite of the national governments that we are living in. That we as a citizens also have a say and has a channel in influencing and shaping how we engage with our neighboring countries or neighborhoods. So this is, I think, one way that we are trying to support each other.
Excellent. And I want to talk as well because so I know that you are a co-founder of Milk Tea Alliance Friends of Myanmar. What does that actually entail?
It entails groups of around 100 activists in almost a dozen countries that are concerning and paying attention to the situations of Myanmar. And they would use their own resources and volunteers for a different role to support the actions and support the call from civil societies in Myanmar. It was originated in 2021, a few days after the attempted coup. Another co-founders and I received a call from some Burmese friends and Myanmar activists who were engaging in different issues such as racial equalities and also democracy movement. And when they called us, they were obviously pretty disenfranchised and somewhat frustrated. They want to know why this authoritarian trend has been repeating, right? Why this coup, this military-led coup, has been repeating in their society time to time, and they would like to have some peers to unpack with them about what is happening in their country, and also trying to co-create some action together that we can support the movement on the ground. So I suggest, okay, let's have a call, right? We're just going to do a check-in. Let's see what kind of actions we can do together, right? We don't want to just publish a statement. Why don't we do something more creative, like offline actions that has symbolic meanings or to spread our messagings. And then those Monday call has gradually evolved into a more regular manner, that not only people are coming here in the space to share about action idea and also coordinate action idea. It has also become a space where people would share their traumas, share things that they have been have been troubled with, to just find a sense of maybe peacefulness in reflecting, what they have been doing and trying to regain some energies. And during COVID time, right, because a lot of people were stuck at home, and that's when I think, okay, so maybe sometimes we don't need to be that strategic. We can just do some community gathering stuff and community building stuff. So sometimes folks in the Friends of Myanmar space might come together, especially during the COVID time, in playing Among Us or some online games, or watch documentary together to learn about each other country situations, to have a sense of community building. So, all in all, the space is a very loose space. with one underlying factor, which is Myanmar. But it is not entirely about Myanmar. It is more about the people that are engaging into the same cause together, and we show up to support each other's, or we serve as a mirror for each other to reflect on our movement, and that's what Friends of Myanmar Space is about.
It's fascinating. So it's coming back into that question before of like the ways in which you can provide support across borders, across specific conflicts, into maybe not necessarily tangible support in terms of here's a box of medicine or here's a shelter, but significant assistance nevertheless. And you also have mentioned that you're working with textiles for the Clean Clothes campaign. Can you explain what that actually is as well?
Yeah, so that's my full-time job. And somehow Myanmar finds me again. My relationship with Myanmar is Myanmar always finds me.
Yep.
Well, in the past 10 years.
It'll do that.
Yeah, we can do that later. So let's talk about Clean Clothes campaign first. So that's my day job. I work for the Clean Clothes campaign as the international coordinator for urgent appeal. And Clean Clothes campaign is a global network of 220 labor unions and social justice organizations that are coming together to fight for a better garment and textile supply chain. So workers and social justice groups working together, compiling and co-creating strategies to leverage brands, companies, manufacturers, and like-minded citizens as well in carrying out advocacy work, direct actions, campaigning to fight for living wage, to fight against gender-based violence, to fight for a safer workplace, and to fight against self-interest threat and wage threat. So Myanmar finds me because several years ago, when I first landed on this job, one of my first case was related to Myanmar. You still remember it was about a Hong Kong company that were engaging in union bustings in the Yangon area. So that was one of my first cases, urgent appeal cases that I work on, and I get to know and get in touch with the Myanmar labor movement. And since the coup, naturally, I become the person who is also engaging in solidarity work to Myanmar, where the organizations would trying to support the security needs of the labor activists. If there's like violations such as wage theft, which is very popular in Myanmar now. I mean, not very popular. I mean, it is very well spread right now in Myanmar. So we will try to go after the brands such as the Zara, such as H&M or Adidas that were sourcing some of those factories, and pressure them in providing remedies or stop the violations in the factories. We try our best in doing that, but the situations in Myanmar, it's those violations is so widespread, and luckily we have also more international groups, I would say, other than Clean Clothes campaign, are also supporting a Myanmar labor movement. And despite there are a lot of violations and atrocity, we are trying to do. Many international groups are still supporting the labor movements in Myanmar.
And this is something that I think is very important because aside from the conflict, the pretty significant turmoil that the country is embroiled in, the textile industry in Myanmar is a massive industry. Obviously, it's not the size of oil and gas exports, but it is an enormous industry. It employs a very large number of people. It's one of the primary exports of the country, and it is also rife with, as you say, union busting, with labor exploitation, withholding wages, forced overtime, basically every type of labor rights violation that we can imagine. It's pretty well entrenched in the industry, and the salaries were never good to start with. Let's be completely honest. So, from my understanding, even if we go back to March of 2021, for those who might remember in those early days of the coup, in about I think around the 15th of March, the factories in Hyundai, which is an industrial district in Yangon, were set alight. And allegations were being made on both sides. Some were saying, oh, the military burned them. Some were saying the protesters burned them. Many of the factories were Chinese owned. And that day, the military went into Hyundai and they shot dead, I think, something on the scale of 60 plus people in one day. And what was explained to me later was that this was not necessarily a protest against the military regime per se. It was not a protest for democracy per se. But what it was an act of anger and frustration over what the workers knew would accompany a military government, which was the continued exploitation and the doubling down on that exploitation, the busting of the labor unions that they had spent a very long time trying to establish. So the fear of the workers being mistreated as a result was quite tangible. And Myanmar has a very long history of union busting and exploitation of laborers. So I'm wondering, within the scope of your work, do you see that there's a sort of secondary undercurrent, not just 100% saying yes, democracy because democracy, but this sort of parallel culture within this industry among workers, basically saying it's not just about democracy, it's also about the fundamental way in which laborers are routinely abused and mistreated. And it is about a struggle for us, yes, to be able to elect our leaders, but also a struggle for us to be able to elect our union representatives so that we can fight for a bargaining agreement which is sufficient for us to be able to survive on and support our families on.
Absolutely. Society is interconnected, and different struggle is also interconnected too. And when I say society is interconnected, that is, if a country is under a political authoritarianism, not only the government would put out and perform authoritarian acts, other elites or those in power, no matter they are working for the interests of those that are in power or working for their own self-interest, they will also copy and duplicate the authoritarian act that they have seen and learn from the authority. So what we are seeing in Myanmar right now is a lot of factory owners is taking advantages of the political turmoil, the conflict, and also the authoritarian practice of the government. They might go after unionists. They might try to ban unions from forming unions. They might try to get police to arrest labor activists who fight for a better wage. Actually, last year we had this one case where almost a dozen unionists and labor activists were supporting a wage struggle because of the hyperinflation and also the lower wages. Like some workers were suffering and they were not even earning a minimum wage, not to say a living wage. So there was this protest, and labor activists and unionists were arrested by the regimes, and they were charged with unlawful associations and engaging in protests. So luckily, that time there were more attentions on this case, and we were managed to mobilize some other international allies in pressuring the brand. And several months after the arrest, these activists were released. It's really hard to pinpoint, what caused the release, because this is, what is happening in Myanmar right now is very arbitrary. But it does show that labor organizing is at risk, and there are ways to fight back. Right there, at least there should be attempts to fight back. So when you have a society that are full of authoritarian practices, other rights such as women's rights, LGBT rights, the rights of ethnic minorities, and the rights of the workers would definitely be affected as well. So democracy is not just about building a democratic institution. It is also about spreading a democratic culture. It is also spreading a consensus among the people that we will need to treat each other decently and not using force or violence to make each other submit. So you're right that not only there is like a secondary conflict that is happening in Myanmar right now. There are multiple layers of exploitation that are intertwined under the backdrops of the conflict, the violence, and the repressions against society. So that really leaves questions about, okay, what needs to be focused first, right? Because do you focus on building democracies, or do you focusing on tackling violations of fair trades? To me, that question is also somewhat challenging in the multi-alliance space as well. That is, how should you spend your energies, and what is the best use of your energies on a certain goal. There are lots of discussion, and I think one conclusions that I come to terms is there's not a single strategies or a single goal that everyone should take. Rather, they should really interrogate themselves. What is our best niche, right? What is our niche? What is our strength? Our individual strengths or our organization strength, and what is our sphere of influence as well. As long as we identify this component, then we will be able to identify what we should focus on, and how to spend our energy to maximize the impact that we want to achieve.
But of course, the flip side of the coin then is that, as you say, that the goal here is for us to treat each other well and to, as you say, spread a culture of democracy. Democracy is not just about achieving a goal on paper, electing a certain person, having certain legislative change. It is a cultural shift. Unfortunately, the opposition to democracy also seems to understand this, and they have a concerted effort to try to limit that, to try to stop people from being able to speak out. And I'm specifically referencing what I know you've mentioned in the past was an incident in Hong Kong where the government or the authority intervened to shut down. I believe it was a presentation by a CDMer. Can you talk us through what actually happened there?
Yeah, so last year, I happened to have an opportunity to come across a CDM medical workers who is based in Hong Kong. And his story was fascinating, and about how he engaged the CDM movement, how he, as an ethnic minority, has navigated the intersections between his identity and also the movement. So I invited him to do sharing in an independent bookstore, which are remaining civic space in Hong Kong for people to talk about democracies, or to talk about to talk about liberal culture. And one day before the sharing, like the managers of the bookstore has received inquiry from the government asking them if they have applied for a license, like an entertainment license for the event. Obviously, we were like, what? Like talking about Myanmar, talk about CDM is not entertainment. And it was held in a private space anyway, so there's no need to apply for an entertainment license. But still, like the government has pressure on the bookstore, and then of safety concern, right? Because we worry that the police might actually come to the premises and harass the attendees of the event. Then we have to take it online. It was still a very good chat. Like I feel like the attendees really appreciate that, especially they can hear the testimony and also the personal sharing, not just about the resistance movements in Myanmar, but also how was it like to be a minorities in the society, and how was it like to be a medical workers that are working throughout the CDM movement, and was it like to be someone who is from Myanmar and now that are staying in Hong Kong. But that is one of the example about how different civic space in Hong Kong were contested. Not only my event were shut down, right? There are multiple incidents that the authority might shut down film screening event. They during the pandemic time they put out fine and against people who participate in public event as well. So it is highly contested. It has become an everyday life that we have to navigate in. But that really, I mean, that particular incident, it does anger me, I would say, because I was like, talking about CDM in Myanmar is the least things that we can do as Hong Konger for Myanmar. Like raising the alarm, talking about the situation, especially Hong Kong is the second largest investor in Myanmar, right? There's so many manufacturers and so many investments that are coming from Hong Kong that are still complicit with the Myanmar junta. And we as a Hong Konger, we have a obligation to at least learn about what's happening in Myanmar, and also to do within our strength to show support or to go against bad actor that has been contributing to the continuing atrocity in Myanmar. So yeah, I mean, I'm still angry.
I can imagine, like, it wouldn't be an easy sort of thing to have to deal with, because it symbolically, if we think about it, and I'm sure you've spent quite a bit of time considering this, symbolically, this is effectively the Hong Kong authority saying they, I mean, at the worst, that they support the military junta. At best, it's them saying, we do not want you to feel solidarity with the Myanmar democracy movement, presumably because democracy is a contagious idea. Civil liberties are a contagious idea, and there are a lot of powers in the continent who don't seem to want this revolution to succeed because they are afraid that if a revolution succeeds without Western intervention, without Western aid, purely domestically, against a population or by a population that is not armed, not militarized, that is in no way, shape, or form prepared for this, against the country that had the second largest military in Southeast Asia, that does not bode well for other dictatorial regimes in the region. They're afraid that people are going to realize that they outnumber the police, they outnumber the military, they outnumber the politicians by definition. So I can understand why the some bureaucrat somewhere in Hong Kong would have looked at this and thought, oh, heaven forbid that we start talking about democracy in other countries. But to actually go through with it, when you stop and you think about the message that that's sending with regards to Hong Kong effectively saying, yeah, you know what, military dictatorship is fine by us. We're good with that. It seems quite perverse. There's no real other way I can.
And I think you understand their intentions a lot. I think you really speak to their intention. They were afraid about the spillover effect the solidarity, and also inspirations that we can give to each other.
Yeah. And I think that's the essence of the Milk Tea Alliance. You
Indeed,
know
it is.
that.
Right after 2019, we have the Thai protests. After the Thai protests, we have the Myanmar struggle, and in between, people in India, they were mobilizing. Indonesia as well, students were mobilizing as well. So indeed, right, there is like spillover effect, and although
Yes.
and when we observe, like the government is trying to shut down this international solidarity or international exchange of ideas about democracy, about equality, we then can understand where our powers are, right? I'm in Hong Kong. I don't have a lot of power. Yes, right. Like our political oppositions were ousted from the parliament. Many people are either in exile or in jail. So how would a Hong Kong person be able to exert political influence to support Myanmar?
Mm.
Yes, we don't have a lot of, and yet, right? Yes, we don't have a lot of tangible political power, but at least we have the power to narrate our struggle. We have the power of putting out a narrative to show that authoritarianism and dictatorship is not the majority. It is the common aspirations among the youth, among the people in the region, that time after time, not just in the past few years, in the past few decades, those people's power movement that we've seen in the Philippines, in Myanmar, time after time has shows that terror and violence could not deter the people's will to gain freedoms and to democracy. And those stories has tied us together and has continued to inspire us that we are on the right side and we have entitlement to what we are fighting for, which is freedom, which is to treat each other decently, to be able to live in a society where people are dignified. And that's what the authority is afraid of. That's what every single dictator in the region is afraid of. To afraid that their people will be able to see between smoke and mirror, see through the smoke and mirror, and be able to take power in their own hands.
Absolutely. And I think the imagery is really apt, because you talk about the spillover effect, and it just makes me think anyone who's had milk tea knows that when that stuff spills, it stains. Um, you're not going to get rid of that all that easily. So I think it's a very beautiful visual metaphor, but I also think that's a relatively natural place for us to conclude our discussion today. And I want to thank you for coming on and discussing these things with us today.
Yeah, thank you. Like reflecting on what we have said at the beginnings about when we were engaging in activisms or doing social changes, there's always some people that we are fighting for and fighting with. And our fellow audience, I don't know, although I don't know you in person, but when I was recounting my activisms, the struggle in Multi Alliance and the struggle in many places, you as a people is in my mind, right? You are providing a very important role. That is, you listen to my narration. You serve as a mirror to support me in reflecting what I've been doing and how I can do better. And for that, I really appreciate it. And once again, like that's one power that the authority could not take away from us. And that's the power that we can show and support each other. So that's the essence of, why we are showing solidarity to each other. That's the essence about why we are continuing in this struggle. And once again, for that, I really appreciate it. Um, yeah, it's there will be a lot of difficulty ahead. But when you are in, when you are disappointed, when you are frustrated, just think about someone whose name is Johnson. You might not know him, but I thought about you a lot, and it's okay to despair, but you are not alone in this journey, and we will win this together.
After today's discussion, it should be clear to everyone just how dire the current situation is in Myanmar. We're doing our best to shine a light on the ongoing crisis, and we thank you for taking the time to listen. If you found today's talk of value, please consider passing it along to friends in your network. And please also consider letting them know that there is now a way to give that supports the most vulnerable, and to those who are especially impacted by the military's organized state terror. Any donations given to our nonprofit mission, Better Burma, will go to the vulnerable communities being impacted by the coup. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go on to support a wide range of humanitarian and media missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person IDP camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, refugee camps, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution to a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause in both websites except credit card. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we can take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either website for specific links to these respective accounts or email us at info@betterburma.org. That's Better Burma, one word, spelled BETTERBURMA.org. If you would like to give it another way, please contact us. We also invite you to check out our range of handicrafts that are sourced from vulnerable artisan communities across Myanmar, available at alokacrafts.com. Any purchase will not only support these artisan communities, but also our nonprofit's wider mission. That's Aloka Crafts, spelled ALOKACRAFTS, one word, alokacrafts.com. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.